In today's episode of Today in World War II, January 2nd, the Finns score a major victory against the Soviet Union in the Winter War. The Germans lose about 7,000 prisoners to the Brits in North Africa. The very first ship on an Arctic convoy to Russia or the Soviet Union was sunk in the history. The Japanese continued their onslaught in the Far East after Pearl Harbor by taking Manila and Clark Air Force Base, as well as Cavite Naval Base. And finally, the Soviets show again why they were not our allies in a larger sense of the word by arresting an open British agent who was working for the British government in resistance to the Nazi regime and throwing him in prison. Let's get started. Okay, on today's date in Finland, the Finns are still giving more than they're getting against the Soviet Union in the Winter War. Today was the Battle of Rata Road. I'm sure most of you do not know a thing about it, which is one of the reasons why I put this in today's episode, because I really feel like there are such important lessons that we can learn from the Winter War when the Soviet Union, without provocation or justification, invades a so-called weaker neighbor that tends to have some major cojones and, for a while anyway, gives them a series of bloody noses. I wonder what the parallel could be in 2022, 23, and 24. Let's think about that. Anyway, the Soviets were still trying to bash their head against a brick wall against the Finns in the Mannerheim line. It was still very cold. It was still very snowy. The Finns were just doing a masterful job of stopping their road-bound columns by taking out the frontal assaults, and then skiing behind them and taking out the rear, and then chopping those miles-long columns into bite-sized bits that they could, destroy. And that's what they were doing. They stopped the Soviets with some anti-tank guns, knocked out about 7 tanks to begin with. Their ski troops flanked them, and then they focused on, as always, on attacking the field, the bonfires and the field kitchens to keep the Soviets hungry and cold. And then the snipers would just pick them off right and left. In fact, the Soviets called the Finnish snipers White Death because they never saw them. They just died. They kept dying. So I won't get into huge detail about this. You can certainly look it up on your own. But let me just give you some statistics that came from this major victory against the Soviets. The Finnish Ninth Division took possession of the road. They took 1,000 Soviet prisoners, 43 tanks, 70 field guns, 278 vehicles, 300 machine guns, 6,000 rifles, and 1,100 horses. They killed anywhere between 10 to 15,000 Soviet troops in that one battle. About 700 Soviet troops were able to evade capture, and they made it back to their own lines. But guess what happened to them? The NKVD, or the KGB of the time, shot most of them for treason because they dared to retreat. So that's how the Soviets treated their prisoners, or not prisoners, I'm sorry, their own people. Okay. I promise I will not execute you for treason if you do not subscribe to my channel and click on the bell that notifies you when I drop a video. However, I will sternly judge you from afar if you don't do it. So I really hope you can do that. It helps you to grow my channel. So I appreciate that. On January 2nd, 1942, the British took about 7,000 prisoners in Libya, Bardia. Most of them were Germans, which was unusual because usually the the prisoners that tended to give up pretty easily were the Italians in North Africa. But the Germans would, if you surrounded them and there was no chance of escape, they would give up grudgingly, but they would. In this case, 7,000 German troops was a pretty good bag for the British. It's noteworthy that they were in the midst of these 7,000 troops. There was a general that was captured, General Arthur Schmidt, which was not a good thing for him, not a good day for him. But this was, the beginning of 1942. This was the beginning of the end for the Germans. They're eventually going to get pushed back into Tunisia. The Americans are going to, and the British are going to invade French North Africa. They're going to catch them in a vice, and they're going to end up losing about, three or 400,000 troops. So it would be a disastrous end of the campaign. This was, the beginning of the end for the Germans and the Italians in the North African front. Um, it will not be the beginning of the end for you if you like my video and leave a comment. It's very simple. I don't ask for money, I just ask for support. And you know the reasons. Every single day I talk about this. So please just do it. Not begging. I only beg for sex, but I will beg you for this. Kind of, not totally. All right. So on January 2nd, 1942, a German submarine, U-134, sank a British ship, Waziristan, in the Barents Sea. Why is this noteworthy? I mean, no offense, but the U-boats sank a ship, between 1939 to 1943, almost every day, if not more. Is significant because it was the very first ship that was sunk in an Arctic convoy where the Western Allies were sending, munitions and supplies and equipment to the Soviet Union. Just to show you what kind of equipment they were getting, this ship alone had 3,700 tons of supplies, including 410 U.S. built trucks. And after I spent a lot of time in Russia. My wife's Russian, my in-laws obviously are Russian. I've got a lot of Russian friends, and they obsess about World War II more than I do, which is scary. But of course, they have their vision and their version of how the war went is totally um, uh, totally obsessed with what they did, and they don't give the U.S. or the Brits or the Canadians or the Australians or anybody else who fought any credit whatsoever. But this one fact remains: if you just look at the trucks that we sent them, you know, they were a horse-bound army. They were a static army. We made them mobile. Our trucks enabled them to outflank the Germans, who by that time had most of their heavy equipment and most of their trucks were destroyed, and the industry could not keep up. So even in just one ship, 410 trucks had been sent to the Soviet Union. They didn't make it, but it just goes to show you. I mean, they sent hundreds of thousands of trucks. U.S. did in the World War II for the Soviets, and at least in 20 plus years I was there, I never got not one thank you from them or no, hardly any acknowledgement. It's all them. It's all the Soviet Union. The Western Allies were just a, you know, afterthought, right? So anyway, nice people. January 2nd, 1942. The Japanese continued their onslaught after Pearl Harbor. In this case, they tightened the vice ever more against the remaining U.S. troops and Filipino troops in Luzon, the main island of the Philippines. They captured the Manila, which was no great shakes because MacArthur had withdrawn all the troops from Manila. The local Filipino government had declared Manila to be an open city. Nevertheless, they did capture it. But most importantly, militarily speaking, was the Japanese took Clark Air Force Base and they took Cavite Naval Base. That was obviously, well, we didn't have any planes left by then. All the Navy had been sunk, or they were transferred down to Indonesia to stop the Japanese to getting Indonesia, which was called the Dutch East Indies at the time. But still, it enabled them to use those bases against the Allies. And then finally, on January 2nd, 1945, a Dutch agent, official agent for the British SOE, the Special Operations Executive, that was a part of the British military that was designed to set Europe ablaze. That was Churchill's words. That they were this. Now, I'm prefacing this because I want you to understand that this was not just some resistance fighter that was not officially attached to any Allied army. This agent, Gerrit van der Waal, is a Dutch national, was a agent against and working for the British. Holland was one of the Western allies, and he had gone to the Soviets in Hungary when the Soviets came into Hungary and said, "Hey, I'm your ally. I'm here working with the Brits." Do they say, "Well, thank you, ally, for all your good work," or whatever? Let's get you back to to England? No, they arrested him, and he spent the rest of the war in prison. And that's what happened all the time. So, you know, forgive me for being somewhat cynical about, I guess it was like what Churchill said, that he would go to hell to do a deal with the devil if the devil was against Hitler. Well, by this time we're gonna find out very soon that they were, this was our new enemy when the Cold War started. So, and shadows of that are even now with Russia still being our enemy. And look what's happening in Europe and all over the world. Um, so, let's just keep that in mind. Okay. They're not our friends. So thank you very much for being to watching this video. I appreciate it. I love to do these things every day for you. So I'll see you tomorrow.